like I said in my last video, it's much more like the individual is imposing upon life, not life is imposing upon the individual. And so by that, I'm meaning to get at how the antinatalist is using the word imposition incorrectly. And if I can show that they're using the word imposition incorrectly, where they're both using the imposer and the imposed as the same object, otherwise they're attacking the knife with the apple instead of the knife attacking the apple. So how are they using it incorrectly, and what's the point of that? The point is that if I show that they're using it incorrectly, then that shows that the way that they are using it is a connotative means of using it. It's not the literal means, it's not the denotative means. Now, imposition comes from the Latin impostio, and that does mean to lay upon, and it's the French history of it is as a tax burden. If you want to lay a tax upon people, then you're imposing upon them, right? So there's a them that's being imposed upon, right? The tax is the means, and so it's the same thing as if Jack is holding a knife and he goes up and stabs Kent, then Jack has imposed the knife upon Kent, right? He's imposed the knife upon Kent. Now, if Jack's just standing there and Kent falls into the knife, did Jack impose the knife on Kent? Well, the answer is no. No, he didn't impose the knife onto Kent, right? So there's this thing with the antinatalists where there's subtle shifts in their vocabulary in order to make the imposer be the same thing as the imposed, where at first it was life is an imposition. And that's when I say, well, what's imposing upon what? Is it the individual, the new individual imposing upon life, or is it life imposing upon the new individual? And Church Seller took me to task saying that just sounds like a bit of poetry, right? Because if you're going to impose, you have to impose upon something, right? Okay, so that got changed to procreation. Procreation is imposition, right? And that was argued prepositionally to stick in that life is a placing of, a putting in, and that by putting in, one is saying, well, they're putting in life into life. They're putting in a new child into life. Okay. And so the argument is that the placing in by itself allows for procreation to be considered an imposition, where the dilemma with trying to find an etymology between procreation and imposition, it's as if I was trying to say the cup goes into the microwave is a prepositional relationship, the same way saying procreation is imposition. To create and place within is a prepositional argument, has nothing to do with etymology, right? So procreation, this might mean that the parents who are doing the procreating have imposed life upon their infant. And that's like stabbing the knife with the apple, right? There's always a bit of a suicide that goes on with the antinatalists, because the antinatalists, when they're talking about a newborn and life, they're trying to say that life is the imposition, the thing, their environment that they're going into is the imposition. But they're using the thing that is like the knife, which would be like the fetus. The fetus is like the knife. Now, back to Charles and Kent. If Charles is holding the knife, Charles is the parent, and he's holding the child, and he reaches out and he stabs Kent with the child, Kent being life, then did Kent impose upon the child? Did life impose upon the child? Right? No, it did not. And that's the antinatalist argument. It's a directional argument that I'm arguing here. The imposition is being used in a particular way, and I'm trying to suggest, no, life is not, Kent is not imposing upon the knife, right? Any more than one says that they go to stab an apple, but they use the apple as the means to stab the knife, or to thrust itself upon the knife. That's the suicide. That's the connotation. The connotation is that an imposition is based on the child, that the parents are imposing upon the child. Now, if you want to say, well, there has to be, if there has to be a sentient being that is that which needs to be imposed upon, right? If you're going to say that, then I'll say not all relationships are of an imposer and an imposed. And the parent-child relationship is not one between the imposer and the imposed. So I'm denying the imposition, that procreation is imposition, and I'm saying procreation is consequent, right? Because it's not placing into life, it is life. If the only thing that can be pointed to, that can be imposed upon, is life, and the only thing that is being discussed or pointed to is the fetus, or is the baby, right? If that's the only thing that can be talked about, then it'd be the case of the knife stabbing the knife. The child is imposed upon itself. The parents have imposed upon the child. See, it doesn't work because the child is not imposed upon. The child is that which does the imposing, right? And so, by the very use of the word imposition, that's why I said there always has to be a subject. There always has to be a subject when you're talking about the word imposition. But you can't use suicide as the answer. You can't take the knife and say that the knife is being imposed upon. The knife is the child in the metaphor. The knife is the child in the metaphor. You can't say that it's being imposed upon. There's a consequence going on whether or not you stab the apple with the knife, or whether or not you throw the apple on the knife, whether or not Kent falls into the knife or the knife falls into Kent. There's a consequence, there's a relationship, right? And so the reason I'm saying don't use imposition is because I'm asking who is being imposed upon, right? If there's three elements, parents, baby, and life, are parents taking life and imposing it upon the child? I say no. They're taking a child and they're imposing it upon life. But see, the reason why this is considered a word game and it's still directionally incorrect by the antinatalist is because since there has to be a sentience that's imposed upon, by default the child is that who is imposed upon. Right? It's like levying a tax against dead people, but even dead people are still a topic, they're still a subject. You know, you can't really levy a tax against dead people. And so the whole point here is that there's got to be a subject, right? And so, you take the imposer, you take the imposed, and you say, well, the knife then is being imposed upon by Ken. And that's the antinatalist argument, is that if there's a stabbing, the knife is the thing that's being imposed upon. It's not the other individual. But the thing is they'll say, well, and I reverse it, because in the metaphor, the only thing that's not sentient is the knife, right? So I'm trying to show this as a directional problem with the word imposition and its relationship to the subject. And I keep saying the antinatalist is using this wrong. Therefore, they're using it connotatively. It's not the denotative definition. It's not how imposition is used historically, etymologically, factually, or in any other way other than when we talk about imposing outside of the antinatalist discussion. So, if you can't see the directional issue, then you don't see my point. And if you do see the directional issue, then I beg of you to find any other example other than the antinatalist example where the word imposition is used without talking about a subject. There always has to be a subject that's being imposed upon. Okay. Now, as far as the rest of the... And this has to do with Poodle's... What's her name? Poodle Susan video. At 47 seconds, you'll hear her ask...
Answer the following. 1. What abstract meaning is attributed by the antinatalist position that is not part of these words, literal and primary meanings?
Okay. That's the word imposition, because it's directionally being used incorrectly by the antinatalist, and therefore there's a connotative meaning going on there. Right? Okay. So the rest of the reasons I don't even want to go over, because I already found the one that violates it. And so it's a connotative use. As far as our arguments back and forth in the comments, Poodle seems to dismiss the claim of the subject as being not important. Okay. She thinks that my use of the word attributing property as a consequence is connotative. See, it may be so that my words are connotative. The problem doesn't have to be... This isn't, my argument is sound. I can still use connotation because I'm not the one that's caught up in creating a value system. As a matter of fact, my argument that suffering is, as opposed to suffering sucks, is based on kind of the etymological lack of value that goes on. And by this I mean the argument, her argument as far as what suffering means goes like this.
Suffering comes from the Latin to bear from below.
Okay, to bear from below, right? And so she and I got in a little comment argument about to bear from below. And I said, well, so you're saying to bear from below automatically equates to that which is negative. And basically she says, yes, and if you deny that, you're not following logical hierarchy, right? Kind of like the way low notes in music, dun, 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 are dark and scary and negative because they're low tones, right? And they might represent stomping in the wild or something like that, which would shake up an individual. But what I'm getting at with words is that the words are by themselves benign. To bear from below, that's what I mean by suffering is. It doesn't say to bear from below and it's very negative and so forth. I mean, is the word negative negative? Right? Just seeing the word negative, is that a negative word? No. So there's this whole antinatalist appropriation of words, and so one of them is suffering, another one might be agony, another one is pain, and they say that pain sucks, right? And I say pain is, meaning there's no reason to evaluate one's sensations unless you're just in casual conversation and you're bantering back and forth, right? So I guess if you guys want to be a casual philosophy and banter back and forth and say suffering sucks, I mean, I know the meaning of the word suffering sucks, but when I look at the denotation, suffering just is. It just means to bear from below, right? It just means something that's disconcerting. It means something that is being told by the universe to the individual that it's disconcerting, that it's not wanted, right? All words parlay and parry into other words. The big language game is trying to demand that language points to reality and that reality is the truth. And this isn't a denial to say that language doesn't lay on reality. It does. It lays on reality like a sponge on the bottom of the ocean. And it rotates and it moves around, and whatever the current paradigm and zeitgeist is wherever that is landed on the ground of reality. And that's what we call truth, is how that moves around. And so my argument is, and this is based on experience. I wouldn't argue this if I didn't know it, that in my worst pain, I was able to separate from the pain and still be completely calm and coherent. And I realized at that point that pain, in the most realistic sense, is also just an experience that's going on, but it's not necessarily negative. Because you can separate yourself from it and it's no longer disconcerting. And this is why I, in the past, accused Gary of being just a wuss. He hasn't broken enough bones. He hasn't had enough suffering, so to speak. He hasn't dipped himself into the water to be buoyant enough to pop back up. Speaking of logical hierarchies. And so he's an intruder. And he's an intruder by being a wuss. And just because he doesn't have any tattoos, I mean, maybe he's got a tattoo. Maybe he's got a tattoo on his nutsack that says worthless. Maybe that's what he's got. And somehow, because his tattoo says worthless on his nutsack, he wants to go ahead and promote. What does he want to promote? He wants to promote the end of humanity. He wants to stick around long enough to do it, so he's even too weak to off himself. Because his message is so important. And it's like one great YouTuber said, why don't we wait until we get about 10 billion of us on the planet, and then we just, we really talk about antinatalism. We really put that out into the airwaves, right? And then we can get up to 40 billion, and then really, then we can even have more messages in the airwaves talking about antinatalism. Anyway, so by default, the knife does not become both the imposed and the imposer. It's not the cup going into the microwave. The cup going into the microwave is that which is imposing because it's being placed being placed in the microwave, right? Poodle Susan accused me, well, you're not talking about sentience. I'm talking about sentient beings. And I went over that. The only things that can be imposed upon, unless you're going to speak connotatively, are sentient beings. I would agree with that. That sounds right. So attacks laid upon people is an appropriate use. Anyway, I don't even know how long I'm going here. But I think I've made the point. That I was trying to make. And so, show me how you guys are either committing suicide with the word imposition, and between life and the infant, which one's opposing upon the other one is not a misuse of the word imposition in terms of its history. If you can show me that, then my argument doesn't stand. Okay, anyway, I'm babbling on. I just hope that I've made a point and that the point was seen and that the point is about the direction of the use of the word imposition and what is considered to be being imposed and what's being imposed upon. And, okay. So, yeah, this is like the imposition being used upon life would be entirely negative on life if one wanted to say the parents are the ones who are taking the apple and they're casting the apple onto the knife. They're shooting it out there, right? And so the apple is living and the knife is dead, and the life would be like life, and the apple would be like the baby, and that's what's really going on. But they're trying to say that procreation, the very act of this process, is an imposition. They're placing the apple on the knife. Now, the problem with doing that is, once again, it's the whole idea of taking life and saying, well, life is going to cut you in half and split you and kill you, right? That's what's going to happen when you're out there. And I believe that it's true that life is eventually going to kill us. But I might say more appropriately that I'm going to die and take, excuse me,